Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about the X-Files Season 2 Episode 10. It's called Red Museum. So spoilers for the episode. This was a wild episode. And I say that because most of it clicked together well enough by the end, but there was a lot of different elements that were introduced throughout this. I mean, when we read the description last time, it was, there's a vegan cult, right? Although they never used the word vegan. I did question when I read that, like, was vegan even a word that was being used in the early 90s? I don't think it was. They just say vegetarian in the show. Clearly, whoever wrote that plot description on IMDb, that was written in hindsight. But you've got this cult with, like, red headdresses and, like, white gowns on that are vegetarian. You've got like a peeping Tom style character who's looking through like a hole in the wall, like Norman Bates from Psycho. You've got a story about teenagers in the town, one being kidnapped and showing up naked, and it might have something to do with possession. But you've also got stories about how the teenagers are really like angry and violent in this town. A hitman shows up in the middle of the episode and starts killing people. There's a story about how the cows are being injected with like various things to make them have more beef and more milk and whatever. And then halfway through the episode, and this was the moment where it felt crazy to me, is that halfway through the episode we just cut to like people in a plane and we end up with a plane crash happening in the town. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? There's so much shit happening in this episode. I mean, so much of the early stuff is about the kids being kidnapped and people suspecting that the vegan cult are maybe behind it or have something to do with it because they're not being trusted. And then all this other stuff kind of gets in the way and it becomes more about that, to the point where in the later chunk of the episode when Mulder goes to the vegan cult to ask for help, I actually had a moment where I went, oh, that's right, the vegan cult exists. I'd forgotten about them. I had forgotten that a vegan cult who all have this dress code, and like their leader is the big, tall, tough guy from Aliens, who I didn't think could speak. I thought he was mute because when they were at like the meeting early on in the episode, he was just typing into like a word processor, and like another woman at the cult was reading out what he was saying. But then when Mulder and Scully go see him, he's just talking. And I was like, oh, I guess that's just part of the ritual, the procession, your sermon, whatever you're calling it. I don't. So yeah, it's a very weird episode that I think, like, yeah, most of it more or less fits together by the end. There was one or two elements that I don't know if maybe I missed a little detail that connected them all up or whatever, but for the most part, it does kind of work. But yeah, kind of, because the opening scene of the episode, the cold open, is kind of like about this family living in the town. This mother works at the butchers or whatever. They're cutting up, cow meat and stuff. And she goes home, and she's got two kids. One's a teenager, one's a bit younger. And she's like, I'm going for a shower, why don't you order a pizza? And she goes into the bathroom, and we get like this, creepy peephole kind of moment, and there's a guy, and you see just like a bit of light on his like eyes as he's watching creepy, and I'm like, oh, it's like, I'd forgotten about the description from the last review. And I thought, oh, this is an episode about some creepy guy hiding in the walls of a house. That sounds fun. And then the teenager leaves after he gets a phone call, and he goes missing. And then the police find him the next morning wandering around in his underwear out by the woods with the words, "He is one," written on the back. And and I'm like, oh, so it's not about the Peeping Tom character, unless the Peeping Tom character is the one who kidnapped the son, which actually it turns out he did kidnap the son, although he's got reasons for it, kinda. I mean, that's not to say that he's not creepy, because he kind of is, but he's doing it. So rather than go through it in order and try and like sort of say how it unfolds, because I don't think I'll remember how all these things like unfold and what order they unfold, I'm just going to try and explain it now in hindsight of like what's actually going on here. So there's a doctor in this town And this is the Doctor who, halfway through the episode, dies in the plane crash. He's on the plane. And we'd never met him before the plane, right? The first time we ever see this Doctor character is on the plane. But this plane goes down. He's got a suitcase full of money on the plane, and that's suspicious. And it turns out that he was being paid by the powers that be, and this ties back into the whole flask thing from the end of season 1 and the alien DNA. And the assassin going around this episode is the guy who also killed Deep Throat in the season 1 finale. I appreciated them doing the little mini flashback when Scully realizes this, because he wasn't a big enough character to remember his face. So I really appreciated the reminder on that. I think that was a smart choice. Sometimes I think TV shows hold your hand a bit too much with that stuff, where they're like, you know, they'll like sometimes they'll do like a flash like that, and it'll be like, this was earlier in the same episode. You don't have to tell me again. But I appreciated that. He was being paid to experiment with injecting this alien DNA into teenagers, or into children, right? Kids that were born, 15 to 18 years ago. And all the kids that were being kidnapped and showing up naked with these messages on their back were kids that were receiving this DNA. And this was the Peeping Tom character, and I'm calling him that even though that's not exactly what he is in hindsight, but that's kind of just what I was thinking of him as. He was trying to expose the kids that had been tested on. I think the sheriff had this theory they were being possessed because they had these like out-of-body experiences or whatever, and there's even a moment early on where Mulder's talking about how this vegan cult might be into this whole thing where they believe in like taking over someone else's body, or someone being a vessel for another spirit, maybe even an animal spirit. And it's a whole thing. And honestly, in hindsight, that kind of went nowhere. It was all just kind of a big red herring for the most part. But again, it's another element. There's so many elements of things in this. There's so many ideas in this episode. You could have built like 5 episodes out of all the plot threads in this one. Anyway. So the kids were being experimented on with alien DNA. And this is kind of first pivoted into because a local in the town tells Mulder and Scully halfway through that he used to be a farmer. He used to, have cattle, all the rest of it. And he quit because the business was changing too much. Now you had to have 500 cows instead of 50. And he's showing them that out in the fields, these guys are injecting the cows with these hormones or whatever that give more milk, more beef, whatever, so on and so on. And Scully's like, well, this has been approved by the FDA. I mean, maybe ethically you think there's something wrong with it, but this is proven to be safe. But the old man's convinced that the rise in like violence and stuff, he talks about how the rape rate has went up, and this is specifically amongst teenagers. Like teenage boys have been sexually assaulting people more in the last like couple of years. And he thinks it's because whatever they're doing to the beef. I actually thought that wasn't the case. I thought it was just kind of like a lead-in thematically to the idea of the idea that they're experimenting on the cattle with things that the humans themselves, the kids, are being experimented on with something. It wasn't so much that the beef itself. It was just more just like, this is happening to humans as well. This is what the bad guys are doing. However, there's a line at the end when Scully's giving her like a little outro speech where she's doing her file report, where she says that, none of the vegans have been affected by this condition that a lot of the kids that had received these injections have had. And she mentions the affected beef. So I guess the beef was also a factor. Like maybe it was like a twofer, like something in the beef combined with like the alien DNA that was being given to some of the kids resulted in like what was happening to them. This increased aggression, this increased attitude, whatever it was. That part was a little bit murky as to how much the beef itself fed into it. But it is true, like, why have the vegan cult if you're not going to show that they're not affected by something that's affecting all of the others that are... But it only seemed to be the teenagers that had been growing up on these alien DNA injections under the guise that it was just vitamins or something. Notably, the mother of the teenager from the start of the episode says that he's never been sick, which is kind of weird, like, to get to, like, 16 years old and have never had a cold or never had anything. That is a bit weird, you know? Kids get sick a lot. It's kind of... Their immune system's not built up yet, so kids tend to spread that shit like wildfire. So that's going on. And the assassin, he's going around killing people to cover up that these experiments ever happened. Basically, the Peeping Tom character exposing these kids and saying he is one, she is one on their backs is basically inadvertently, because he doesn't really know what's happened to them necessarily. He's well, he must know something because he's picking them, but he doesn't know like who's in charge of it. He just knows that the doctor was doing stuff to them. This is kind of inadvertently possibly starting to expose that these experiments ever went on. So this guy who shot Deep Throat is now going around killing anyone involved. So he kills like the guy who was injecting the cows because they were being paid to inject the kids as well on behalf of the doctor. There's so much to keep track of. And he kills one of the kids. In fact, the kid he kills is the son of the sheriff, who's introduced earlier in the episode, and we see that he's kind of a dick to the cult members, where he sort of yells at them in the street, and he's a bit, he's got an aggressive attitude. His girlfriend's actually the second teenager who's taken, but she does turn up fine, like the kid at the start, just shaken up and confused and whatever. But he actually gets found dead, and it's quickly implied that the assassin has killed him. And this actually leads to a very interesting part in the last chunk of the episode where Mulder and Scully realize that all of the teenagers are targets because whoever's doing this is trying to clean up their dirty work. They're trying to clean up that this experiment ever happened, and that means taking out everyone who was a part of it. So they actually go and collect all the families, and they end up going to the vegan cult to stay and hide because they might be safe there. It's one central location. And it's so funny because, like I said, when they go to the vegan cult for help, I had forgotten they existed because by that point in the episode, it had been like 15, 20 minutes since we'd seen any of them. It was not a factor for so long. But that's kind of what happened. So the big climax of the episode ends up being about confronting the assassin, and Mulder and him have a bit of a chase around in the meat processing plant. Mulder wants him alive, but of course the sheriff's son was killed, so when the sheriff has him dead to rights, and to be fair, the assassin's about to light a gas canister, which is like, spread out across the whole building to blow it up. So he is somewhat justified in at least taking one shot, but he empties his clip into him because obviously he's upset about his son, and so Mulder doesn't get his living person that he can question. He just has to accept that he got saved and no more. And that was a fine enough sequence, but like I say, just the turbulence I was feeling, and no pun intended because of the plane crash, but the turbulence I was feeling by the time I got a third or so into this episode, when it kept introducing these new things that felt like, how could these all possibly fit together? And some of it was kind of a red herring. The town's dispute with the vegan cult ended up being kind of, I think Scully at the end refers to them as a control group. It was basically just a group that whoever was behind all this was using to sort of help mask what was going on. And it was like, hey, we'll give the town a villain to look at so they're not questioning these other things that are happening or going on. Whew, that was a lot to explain. There was a lot to get through there. And I'm not sure how much of my opinion I've even given on any of this yet. I've just literally tried to make sense of it, and that's all so far. Did I like the episode? That's a good question. That's a question I should answer. It's a review after all. That's kind of what we're here for. Kinda. I guess I can. I mean, I had, I can't deny I wasn't, engaged. I can't deny that I wasn't, trying to piece it all together. It's definitely a messy episode, for sure. There's so much going on. And it mostly comes together. I wouldn't say it all fits together perfectly by the end, but it does, it makes more sense than I thought it was going to. I'll say that at the very least. The one effect that it does have, though, is that because by the end you realize, oh, all this really is that the bad guys from the secret part of the government or whoever were experimenting with the alien DNA on these kids, and the assassin's covering it up. Everything before that or outside of that main thing that I just said is kind of just not as important, right? By the time you get to that last 5 minutes, you kind of realize that all the other stuff about is the possessions going on, what's with the messages on the kids' bags, all of that's not actually that important by the end. And I'm not going to say it feels like a bunch of red herrings necessarily, because that's not entirely true either, but it does feel a bit strange as a plot structure and progression. By the time you get to the end, it's kind of weird that some of it felt like just avenues that didn't matter that much almost. But I mean, it kept shaking it up. I can't deny that it kept throwing new things at me, and much like I forgot the cult existed, it was the same with the Peep and Tom character, honestly. that was at the start of the episode, and there was like a moment when Mulder and Scully were talking to the mum and asking her questions, where Scully kind of has this weird moment where she looks over at the mirror, and like she catches a glint of the light coming through the hole. And I was like, oh yeah, there was like a Peeping Tom character. Like there was a few plot lines in this episode that were, when they came back in, because they were so separate and different from each other, I went, oh yeah, that's a thing. That's another thing that's happening in this episode. I had that over and over again. But anyway, a little nitpick at the start, actually, which is just kind of like a choice from an actor, or well, not the actor, it's more in the script, but when they find the first teenager like wandering outside in his underwear, and he's got the "He is one" written on the back. When he turns round and the police officer sees what's on his back, he gets a shocked look in his face, and he says, "Oh my god!" And then you get a shot of what's on the back, and it's just this "He is one" written on his back. And I really thought that was a bit deflating, because I didn't think it lived up to the "Oh my god." Part of me was thinking, did I like see that and it was actually carved into his back? Because that would more justify the reaction the cop had. But it was just kind of like, oh no, I mean, don't get me wrong, like, obviously he's been through some shit, but I wouldn't say that the writing on the back is the shocking part of this. It's more that he was kidnapped and stripped down, and he's clearly out of it and probably been given something to be that way. Those are the shocking parts. The writing on the back is pretty low in the shock factor, but it is what it is. It was interesting seeing Scully kind of like recognize the guy that killed Deep Throat and kind of bringing that up to Mulder, and then realizing it was maybe connected to all this other stuff going on that's more central to the show. And maybe that's what they were going for with this episode, is the idea that, oh, this is just a wacky standalone episode about a vegan cult. Oh no, psych, it's actually tying into like the main sort of plot and bad guys of the show that we've been kind of dipping back in and out of since early season 1, basically. Maybe that was the idea behind it, but it definitely made for a weirdly entertaining time. I'll certainly give it that. I did appreciate the smash cut early on as well. After they've done their first round of investigating, and Mulder's like, hey, can you recommend a motel, maybe a place to eat? And the sheriff's like, oh, you've picked the right place for that. Smash cut to Scully in a restaurant with like just sauce or gravy like just dripping down her mouth, like comically so. Although they have like a little like oddly sweet moment here where Mulder reaches in and wipes it, and I'm like, okay, they're at that level, because he's obviously felt a bit more protective ever since Scully's whole kidnapping and all that thing, right? He's been a bit more protective. And it felt like he had to get over that last episode. I feel like in this episode it doesn't really come up, but there is just this little moment where he wipes that away in her face, and she just sort of gives him a little glance, and it's like he's taking care of her. I think it's just a nice little moment, but regardless, it was just like I just wasn't expecting that cut. Obviously, I got that they were going to probably bring up that the food was good or something, but I wasn't expecting smash cut to them both wearing bibs and both drooling. And I think going along with everything else I've said about this episode, constantly introducing new like ideas and new elements, that's also true of characters. Like every time that one of these new things is introduced, there's basically another character, well, sometimes more than one, but certainly at least one new character that effectively just comes out of nowhere. I mentioned how we didn't really know about the Doctor until the plane crash, and it's not until after he's dead that we find out he was a Doctor and who he was. Similarly, like the whole cow thing is only brought up because a character shows up out of nowhere and says, hey, you're the FBI agents, I've got something to show you, which is fine in a vacuum on its own, but goddamn, like there's so many characters in this episode. Like this is one of the biggest guest cast lists I think the show's ever had. The guy from Aliens, Mark Ralston's the only one that I recognized or knew from anything, but like there's a lot of characters. You've got him leading the cult, and he's got like a second in command, and then obviously a bunch of extras for the cult itself. You've got the sheriff and his son. You've got the teenager from the start of the episode and his mom and little brother, who are focused on a bit here or there. You've got the Peeping Tom character. There's quite a lot of characters. You've got the two guys. Actually, the Peeping Tom is one of the guys working on the cows, but you've got his partner who also works on the cows. You've got the assassin who comes in and kills everyone. It's a lot of characters. So, I mean, I suppose if I'm going to make a critique here is that with so many characters, I wouldn't say that it has time to really make you get to know or care about any of them, really. which isn't necessarily a big deal if we're just caring about Mulder and Scully. I think some of the best episodes of X-Files, though, will make you care about the central character in whatever the plot is that week. Whereas here, I think the closest maybe that they to try and do that with is the sheriff, because he obviously cares about his son, and it's kind of a big deal that his son is dead. So that might have landed more if we had more time of him interacting with his son, perhaps. So, because he mentions he's got a son, we then meet the son. I did enjoy that scene, actually. I think it's probably one of my favorite smaller scenes in the episode. Is the scene? It's right after Mulder and Scully were in the restaurant, and he sees there's a younger member from the cult, like a teenager, in the outfit, and he gets harassed by these like 3 or 4 other teenagers, and Mulder goes out to de-escalate it and tells him to get lost. And they give them some smart-ass talk, but then Scully comes up after, and they just happen to catch a glimpse of her gun, and they realize that, and he's like, oh, maybe we should tell my dad about this. He's the sheriff. And Mulder's like, I think we will. We're FBI. He doesn't actually say that last part, but that was the sentiment I was getting from the scene. I kind of appreciated this, because it felt interesting to see Mulder and Scully deal with just such a normal little conflict, I guess. Plus, it was a nice reveal that this little shithead is in fact the sheriff's son, just because it made if nothing else, all these characters do make the town feel like it's very well lived in, as opposed to only really getting to know one character. But there's give and take with that. Like I said, you don't really get to know enough of these characters to really care about any one of them individually, which isn't what the episode's going for, to be fair. This episode is about plot. It's about plot, and it keeps throwing more plot at you. It keeps giving you more turns, and that's what it's doing, and at that, it's relatively entertaining. I don't know if I'd necessarily rank it highly if I'm doing, my best 5 episodes at the end of the season or whatever, just because fundamentally, I'm always going to take a little bit more emotional investment over just absurd fun plot shenanigans, but that's definitely what this episode was, and it was relatively entertaining at doing it, so I can't be too mad at it either, by any means. I will say, I was at least a little bit glad, though, it didn't turn out to just be investigating a cult episode, because we have done that kind of thing before, and it wasn't my favourite. So this very quickly being not just something else, but 5 other things was a welcome jolt to the system. So that's my thoughts on this X-Files. So thank you very much for joining me. You can let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments. It's always nice to see. You can hit the like button, and you can support everything by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and supporting over there with a little bit of monies. Or you can super thanks on the videos. Some people occasionally do that, and it's always very nice, and I always appreciate it when they do. But thank you very much for joining me. It's been a pleasure. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?